Daisuke, the room smelled of lacquered wood, burnt incense, and old power. Haruki Daisuke sat in perfect stillness at the head of the conference table. 12 men and women in suits lined both sides of the long room. Some loyal, some bought, all watching, waiting. An attorney cleared his throat. Per the final stipulations, in the will of the late chairman, Ichiro Daisuke, Haruki's jaw flexed once, only once. Control of Daisuke Innovations will fully transfer to Haruki Daisuke if, and only if, he is legally married within 6 months of the date of death. A ripple of shock moved across the room, like wind through dry grass. Haruki remained motionless. Kenta Daisuke, his father, let out a soft chuckle from the far end. "How poetic," he murmured, loud enough for all to hear. The old man still thought a wedding ring was more powerful than market share. Haruki looked straight ahead. He built an empire on covenant. I shouldn't be surprised he wanted to end with one. His voice was calm, precise, unshaken. But inside, something burned. The lawyer continued. If the condition is not met, control of the company passes to the board. If the board cannot reach a 2/3 consensus, interim power will be granted to... He paused, visibly uncomfortable. To Mr. Daigo Ishikawa. Haruki turned his head slightly, ice in his gaze. "You mean the bastard," he said plainly to Kenta. Kenta Daisuke didn't flinch. He simply leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers, the very image of smug authority. "Half-brother," he corrected. "Same blood, less drama, and unlike you, Daigo doesn't carry your messiah complex." The boardroom stilled. No one dared speak. Haruki rose to his feet, calm but coiled. "I'll be married in 3 months." He poured himself a glass of Yamazaki as the sun began to set over Tokyo's glittering skyline. The silence of the penthouse was not peaceful. It was heavy, a shrine of ambition built high above the city with nothing human in it. He didn't believe in love, not in the way people dressed it up and sold it in department stores on Valentine's Day. Marriage was leverage, position, optics, but it needed to be the right marriage, one that the board couldn't spin as another soulless merger. He needed someone unexpected, unpolished, unshakably moral, someone who would scandalize his father and sanctify the company's image at once. He opened his laptop, clicked through emails, and then paused on one. Subject line, Breakthrough Women of Faith, live stream replay. A still frame showed a woman, black, regal, eyes closed in prayer, mouth open mid-testimony. He clicked. When I lost the grant, when they slandered my name and took my church ID off the door, I still knew God was good, because a foundation built on truth can't be burned down. It might crumble, but it'll never be hollow. Haruki narrowed his eyes. She wasn't trying to perform. She wasn't begging for approval. She was fire and dignity. She would terrify Kenta. He clicked back, typed in her name, Mari Clarke, former youth minister, nonprofit founder, unmarried, blacklisted in the U.S. for whistleblowing against financial misconduct in a megachurch. His lips twitched, not quite a smile, but close. He lifted his phone. Yamada, get me her schedule. Flights, hotels. I want her in a room with me by the end of the week. But sir, no excuses. This isn't a business acquisition. It's war. Mari Clarke sat cross-legged on the guest bed of a tiny missionary flat in Tokyo, scrolling through her phone with numb fingers. She had stopped reading the headlines 2 days ago. Mari Clarke misuses funds from nonprofit. Ex-minister excommunicated after whistleblowing. Faith-based fraud. Atlanta's darling spirals. All lies. And yet, there was silence from those she once called friends. Silence from her donors. Silence from her former church leadership. "Lord," she murmured, resting her forehead on her folded hands, "if you told me to speak truth, why does it feel like I lost everything for it?" A soft knock at the door made her look up. It was Hanae, the sweet volunteer who'd hosted her for the conference. "You have a visitor," she said in accented English. "He says it's urgent. From Daisuke Innovations." Anne blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" The meeting place was a private rooftop garden atop a high-rise overlooking Shinjuku. The skyline burned gold with sunset. Haruki Daisuke waited by a stone bench, immaculately dressed, arms folded. Anne approached with caution in her step and steel in her spine. He turned to face her. "Anne Mari Clarke. And you're the CEO who sent 2 armed-looking assistants to escort me here," she replied. He inclined his head. "I'm also the man with the proposal." She crossed her arms. "If this is a PR stunt, I'm leaving." "It's not. It's a contract." He opened a leather folder and slid a document toward her across the stone bench. Anne frowned. "A marriage contract? 1 year. No intimacy. No obligations beyond public appearances. You live as my wife in name only. In exchange, I will fully fund the rebirth of your nonprofit globally, with no interference." She stepped back like the folder was on fire. "You want me to play dress-up wife so your father doesn't steal your empire?" "Precisely. You're out of your mind." Haruki's expression didn't flicker. "Probably, but I've seen your record. You didn't lie about that church. You've been crucified for telling the truth. That kind of woman has value in my world. Optics, integrity. I'm not your political statement. Number? You're the weapon my father would never see coming." She shook her head, fire rising in her chest. "I'm not for sale." Haruki's gaze softened, barely. "This isn't about buying you. This is about giving you space to rebuild while we both get what we need. And before you say no, check your bank app." Her brows furrowed as she pulled out her phone. The last major donor to her nonprofit had just pulled the plug. Her balance sat at $11.28. "God," she whispered, "you're really going to let me walk through this fire, huh?" She looked up at Haruki. "Give me 3 days." He nodded once. "You'll have them." Anne spent the next 72 hours praying, fasting, wrestling. Her pride screamed no. Her heart whispered maybe. The 4th morning, she stood alone on the rooftop of the missionary home, Tokyo buzzing below her, sky wrapped in early light. She lifted her hands and prayed out loud. "If I say yes, it won't be for money. It'll be for purpose. You open doors no man can shut. If this is one of them, give me peace." Peace didn't thunder. It didn't shine. It simply settled. She turned and walked downstairs, picked up her phone, dialed. "Mr. Daisuke, I'll sign." Silence on the other end. Then, understood. Anne hung up. Her knees buckled, but she didn't fall. She stood in the middle of an earthquake and held firm. Because if this was her wilderness, she would walk it with dignity. The wedding was exactly what Haruki Daisuke promised. Quiet, legal, loveless. The civil registrar read through the necessary vows in an echoing municipal chamber with stone floors and sterile light. A government seal loomed behind them, flanked by 2 impassive witnesses, one from Haruki's legal team, the other from his security. Anne stood in white, not satin or lace, but a crisp, clean suit with pearl buttons and no veil. Her hair was coiled into a tight puff, her eyes calm, her lips unsmiling. Haruki wore gray, tailored with robotic precision. He looked at her only when required. No rings were exchanged. No kiss sealed the moment. Only signatures. Pen, paper, done. "Congratulations," the clerk said dryly. You are now legally husband and wife. Anne exhaled. God, what did I just do? Haruki offered her his arm for the walk out. She hesitated, then took it with the grace of a woman who understood optics. Outside, cameras waited. Flashbulbs burst like gunfire. The media rollout was strategic. Daisuke marries Christian humanitarian in surprise ceremony, a union of honor and integrity. Haruki's PR team released carefully filtered images of them standing beneath cherry blossoms, their expressions solemn, united, businesslike. But the whispers behind closed doors were different. At a charity dinner 2 days later, Anne sipped sparkling water while stares pierced her back like blades. Is she his project now? An American? Really? Too dark? Too loud? Too religious? I heard she was expelled from her church. Scandalous. Anne smiled politely, holding her ground as if nothing touched her. But inside, her shoulders curled tighter with each passing comment. One woman, draped in silk and cruelty, leaned in too close during the meal. Your English is very impressive, she said sweetly. Did you grow up in the inner city? Anne set down her fork. Did you grow up with manners, or did they just not stick? Across the table, Haruki's brows rose. A flicker of amusement passed behind his cold exterior. But later that night, he found her on the penthouse balcony, barefoot, gripping the edge of the railing like it was holding her together. You didn't have to engage, he said, stepping beside her. I did, she replied, because silence protects people like them. He said nothing, just looked at her, really looked, for the first time in days. You handled it well, he said finally. Anne turned, her voice low. I didn't come here to be handled. That night, alone in her room, Anne dropped her calm. She sat on the floor, wrapped in a throw blanket, staring at the wedding certificate. Her name beside his, Anne Mari Clarke Daisuke. Lord, I said yes to survive, she whispered, but this doesn't feel like obedience. It feels like compromise. She pressed her palms to her face and didn't try to stop the tears. They fell, warm and silent, into the shape of her hands. On the other side of the wall, Haruki sat awake in his study, sipping tea and watching her wedding photo on the screen. He didn't know why he was still looking at it. Maybe it was the way she stood beside him, straight-backed and unflinching. Maybe it was because every woman he'd met before smiled for the camera, but she didn't perform. She simply was, strong, still, unbending. And for the first time since his mother's death, Haruki wondered if grace came wrapped in armor, and if maybe it had found him again, uninvited. The invitation came in a black envelope. No name, no note. Just a time, a location, and a subtle command hidden behind the elegance. Anne almost ignored it, but something in her spirit said, go, carefully. She arrived at the rooftop lounge of the Aman Tokyo wearing navy slacks, a silk blouse, and armor forged in prayer. Kenta Daisuke was already waiting. He stood as she approached, dressed in a dark kimono jacket, sipping matcha with the posture of a man who believed he ruled every room he entered. Mrs. Daisuke, he said, offering a nod more condescending than courteous. I don't recognize your authority, Anne replied, taking a seat opposite him. Kenta smiled. You are as bold as they say. And you're as old-school manipulative as I expected. He chuckled. Then let's not pretend. I want you to leave Haruki. Anne blinked, then laughed lightly. You think I married him not for love? No, Kenta said smoothly. I think you married him for survival, and I'm offering you something better. He placed a sleek black briefcase on the table and opened it. Stacks of yen, neatly packed. A graceful exit, no scandal, a donation to your nonprofit. and a ticket back to whatever mission field you prefer. You walk away, quietly. I ensure your name isn't dragged any further." Anne leaned forward, voice low and steady. "See, I've stared down demons dressed in tailored suits before. Men who quoted scripture to cover corruption. I've learned to recognize rot beneath cologne, and you reek of it." Kenta's eyes narrowed, his smile gone. "You believe in grace, Mrs. Daisuke. Prove it. Walk away before this becomes unpleasant." Anne stood. "I don't work for you. I don't fear you. And I certainly don't sell out my calling for currency. You want me gone? Pray harder." She left him with the wind shifting around her like fire. That night, restless, she wandered the east wing of the Daisuke estate. Behind a loose panel in the library wall, she found a photo. Old, faded, creased at the edges. A woman with soft eyes and a kind smile, arms around a young Haruki. A wooden cross hung from her neck, barely visible but present. Anne brought it to him. "Is this your mother?" Haruki stiffened. He was standing in the kitchen, about to pick up a cup, but his hand froze mid-motion. "Where did you find that?" "In the library. Hidden, almost." He turned slowly. His voice was flat, controlled. "She used to hum hymns, in English. It embarrassed my father. He said she was weak, that she let fantasy replace honor." Anne stepped closer. "Was she a Christian?" He didn't answer for a long time. Then, quietly, "They said she went mad, that she wandered into the sea. But she wrote a letter before she died. It was burned before I could read it." Anne's throat tightened. "Do you think she died for her faith?" Haruki's jaw clenched. "I think..." She was silenced. She reached out, gently touching the edge of the photo. "Then I think I know why you chose me." He looked away. "Don't romanticize it." "I'm not," she said softly. "I just see the wound you haven't named yet." The next morning, her photo was on a tabloid cover. CEO's wife, charity fraud or redemption queen. Black Christian bride raises eyebrows in Japan's elite circles. Online comments were worse. "She looks like a publicity stunt." "A missionary turned gold digger." He downgraded to make headlines. Anne scrolled without blinking, closed the screen, set her phone down. She breathed deeply and whispered, "Lord, I'm not new to fire. Just don't let me burn alone." In the hallway, Haruki listened through the cracked door, and for the first time, he didn't feel in control. He felt ashamed. The threat came in the form of a manila envelope left on the steps of the Daisuke estate. Inside, printed photos of Anne, leaving the worship circle, shopping alone, a typed note. "Saints still bleed. Don't get too comfortable." Haruki's jaw locked as he stared at the note. The veins in his hand bulged as he crumpled it. Anne sat quietly across from him in the security office, her arms crossed. She didn't flinch when the head of security mentioned the stalker had breached the outer property line. "She's not staying in the guest wing anymore," Haruki said coldly. "Move her into the private suite. Mine." Anne looked up, startled. "Excuse me?" "It's the most secure space in the estate. Only one entrance. Bulletproof glass, internal locks." She narrowed her eyes. "You sure this isn't about optics?" He met her gaze. "It's about survival." The private suite was twice the size of her apartment in Atlanta. Glass walls, modern furnishings, and a king-sized bed that looked like it had never known actual sleep. Haruki stepped inside behind her and gestured to the inner bedroom. "You'll stay in there. I'll take the adjoining room. Doors stay locked unless there's an emergency." She looked around. "You have no family photos, no memories, nothing that breathes." He glanced at her. "What would I need them for?" Anne shook her head. You live like a man who doesn't expect to be remembered." His voice was soft, almost a whisper. "I'm not sure I deserve to be." That night, thunder rumbled low in the Tokyo sky. Rain splashed against the glass walls, thick and steady. Anne, in her t-shirt and sweats, wandered into the kitchenette barefoot. She found Haruki already there, making tea. He turned as she entered. His eyes lingered a second longer than necessary. "You drink chamomile?" she asked, raising a brow. "I sleep 2 hours a night. I'll try anything." A beat passed. He poured a second cup and handed it to her without speaking. Their fingers brushed. It was nothing. It was everything. They sat in silence on opposite ends of the sofa, cups in hand, the rain filling the quiet between them. Anne exhaled slowly. "You ever wonder why God lets us walk into impossible places?" Haruki glanced sideways. "I stopped wondering about God a long time ago." "Maybe he didn't stop wondering about you." The rain whispered against the glass. Haruki stared into his cup. Then, without a word, he set it down on the table. He shifted, slowly, moved to the middle cushion. Anne didn't flinch. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, but then turned to her. Closer now, not touching, but near enough that she could feel the heat between them. Their eyes locked, his jaw clenched. He didn't kiss her, but he leaned in, carefully, like testing the weight of something sacred. She didn't move. For one fragile, burning second, the space between them nearly vanished. Then she pulled away, not abruptly, just enough to remind them both what the line was. "Good night, Mr. Daisuke." He nodded once. "Good night, Mrs. Daisuke." The next morning, she woke early and wandered down to the sunroom. Glass walls soaked in gold light. She set her phone on the table, hit play, and began to sing. "You are my hiding place." Her voice was low, clear, unwavering. As she sang, she raised her hands, eyes closed, her Bible open on her lap. Haruki stood just beyond the door, watching. Something twisted in his chest. Not desire, not even admiration. Longing, not for her body, but for whatever peace lived in her chest. That night, Haruki slipped away from the house. His driver didn't ask questions. He walked into a small chapel tucked between two alleys in Ueno. Dusty pews, no priest, only silence. He sat alone, stiff and unsure. He looked up at the cross. "If you're real, I want to know why she believes you when nothing else makes sense." His voice cracked. "I want to know why her voice sounds like home, when I've never had one." Silence answered him, but somehow, he didn't feel alone. Anne padded barefoot into the kitchen of the estate just past 10 p.m. Her curls were wrapped in a scarf, and she wore an oversized button-down shirt. She'd only meant to grab water. Instead, she found him at the stove, sleeves rolled, no blazer, bare feet. He stirred something fragrant in a clay pot, steam rising gently around his face. She blinked. "You cook?" Haruki glanced back, startled. "When I can't sleep." She stepped closer. "What is it?" "Miso soup, from scratch. My mother's recipe." Anne leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "You remember it?" His voice softened. "Only this one. She made it every time I got sick. Said it helped mend things from the inside out." Anne smiled. He looked at her then. Really looked. "You wear silence better than most people wear words," he said quietly. She blinked. "That's a compliment, right?" He handed her a spoon, and she laughed. They stood shoulder to shoulder, sharing sips from the same pot. No tension, no performance, just presence. "She would have liked you," Haruki said after a while. Anne tilted her head. "Your mother?" He nodded. You remind me of her. Fierce, soft-spoken, until you speak. And when you do, people can't look away. She swallowed hard, the warmth of the soup forgotten in her hands. You would have made her proud, she said. His voice barely held. Do you really think so? I don't say things I don't mean. He turned, only slightly, and met her gaze. Tired, open, vulnerable. If this wasn't a contract, he said, do you think we'd have found our way to this kitchen anyway? Anne didn't answer. She didn't need to. Instead, she lifted the spoon again, blew gently, and held it out for him. He took it. No hesitation. They stood like that, the storm tapping on the windows like applause. It started with an old shoebox. Anne found it by accident while searching the upstairs study for a spare notebook. Hidden beneath yellowed legal files and crumbling blueprints was a dusty, taped box marked only with a name she'd seen once before. Aya Daisuke, Haruki's mother. Inside, among faded Polaroids and a pressed cherry blossom, was a cassette labeled in delicate script. Haruki, Psalm 27. Anne stared at it for a long time. Her fingers trembled as she lifted it out. She waited until Haruki returned home that evening. He looked exhausted. Shadows under his eyes, suit jacket slung over one shoulder. I found something, she said gently, holding the tape. He stared. His voice was low. Where? In your mother's files. He swallowed hard. They sat together in the sunroom, silence thick between them. She placed the cassette in an old player she'd borrowed from a local church. Pressed play. A woman's voice, soft, melodic, slightly trembling, filled the room. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? Haruki gripped the armrest, breath hitched. Though an army besiege me, my heart will not fear. His head dropped. By the final verse, he was weeping. Not clean, cinematic tears, but broken, years too late sobs that shook his shoulders. Anne moved to sit beside him. She loved you, she whispered. You don't lose faith like that unless you fought for it. Haruki covered his face. I never got to tell her I didn't hate her for leaving. I was just scared. Anne laid a hand over his. Then say it now. Through clenched teeth, barely audible, he whispered, I miss you, Mama. I'm sorry. It was raining again. Tokyo's soft, unrelenting kind that blurred the city lights and made the world feel quiet. Anne didn't bother with an umbrella. She liked the feel of rain on her skin, cleansing, present. She walked the garden path alone, barefoot on the smooth stone. Behind her, footsteps. She turned. Haruki stood just a few feet away, holding an umbrella. For a moment, he didn't speak, just watched her. You'll catch a cold, he said quietly. I'm not made of paper, she replied. He hesitated, then stepped forward, held the umbrella above them both. They stood close, too close. The space between them a secret only the rain could hear. I listened to the tape again, he said. Her voice. I'd forgotten what it sounded like. Anne looked up. Then remember now. His hand trembled slightly on the umbrella's handle. I don't know what this is, he admitted. You, me, this ache. Anne's gaze held his. It doesn't have to be defined yet, but it does have to be honest. He nodded slowly. Then, gently, his fingers brushed against hers under the umbrella, and she let them stay. Not a kiss, not a confession, but contact, quiet and electric. And for the first time, they smiled. Meanwhile, across Tokyo, Kenta Daisuke watched a different kind of recording. A leaked internal memo from Haruki's legal team, detailing the contract marriage clause. He clicked his tongue. Sloppy, son. He tapped a button on his tablet and made a call. Leak it. Sir, that would compromise the board's... I said leak it, and find someone who can discredit her. And Mari Clarke? Let's see how she handles ghosts from her past. The ghost came 3 days later. Anne stood outside a cafe near the university, waiting for her rideshare, when a voice from behind froze her blood. Anne? She turned slowly. Marcus, tall, familiar. A face once trusted, now a memory that burned. Marcus, what are you doing in Japan? I came to see you. Her mouth tightened. You came across the world uninvited? I saw the headlines, the marriage, the scandal. I needed to know if you were okay. She folded her arms. You didn't care if I was okay when I was getting death threats for exposing the truth. You stood with the board, remember? He looked down. I was scared. Anne took a slow step back. Don't confuse regret with repentance. I've changed. Then change somewhere else. She turned and walked away. What she didn't see was the man across the street snapping photos with a telephoto lens. And what she didn't hear was Marcus answering a call an hour later, whispering, "Yes, I made contact." The estate's small prayer room was rarely used. Tucked behind a lacquered sliding door, it held no incense, no idols, just tatami mats, a low wooden table, and a framed window facing the garden. Anne found it by accident. Or maybe God led her there. She knelt with her Bible and a worn journal, the silence folding over her like a shawl. She began to hum. I need thee. Oh, I need thee. The door slid open quietly behind her. Haruki. He stood in the threshold, eyes hesitant. I heard singing. Anne gave a small nod, then turned back toward the garden. It helps. He stepped inside, closed the door behind him. What are you reading? He asked. Psalm 61. When my heart is overwhelmed, lead me to the rock that is higher than I. Haruki crossed the room, slowly, carefully, and knelt beside her. You pray every day, he said, because I forget who I am every night. He looked down. I envy you. Anne turned, eyebrows raised. You envy me? Your anchor, he said. The way you trust a God you can't see, even when everything around you collapses. It's not trust without wrestling, she said. I've screamed at him, cried, walked away in my heart 1,000 times, but he keeps pulling me back. They were quiet again. Then Haruki asked something so small it nearly disappeared. Can I pray here? Anne's throat caught. Of course. He didn't kneel formally, just folded his hands like a boy who didn't know the steps. Anne bowed her head beside him. The closeness charged, not romantic, but sacred. Haruki whispered, God, I don't know the words, but if you're real, if you're who she says you are, then maybe you can help me believe, too. The silence after was thicker than any vow. Anne's voice trembled. Do you feel that? He looked up. Feel what? Peace, sitting right between us. His eyes searched hers. I do, he whispered. But if I reach for you, I'll lose it. She nodded. Then don't. Let God reach us both first. They sat in silence, so close they could feel each other's warmth. So still, they could feel God's presence. The photo was front page news by morning. CEO's wife reunites with ex-fiancé in secret Tokyo meeting. Sources suggest the marriage of optics is crumbling. Anne stared at the screen in disbelief. The photo was zoomed, grainy, but unmistakable. Marcus standing close, leaning in, Anne, mid-blink, caught between surprise and irritation. It looked like intimacy. It wasn't. But truth had never mattered to the media. She burst into Haruki's office minutes later, her tablet in hand. "You saw this?" He didn't look up from his desk. "I did." Anne blinked. "And?" His voice was flat. "You have a past. I expected it to find us eventually." "That's all you have to say?" He finally looked at her. "Should I ask if there's more going on?" Her throat closed. "You don't trust me." He stood. "I don't trust anyone, Anne. Especially not people who appear in scandalous headlines 2 months into a legal marriage." She flinched. "So that's it?" she asked. "You're defaulting to suspicion instead of asking me what actually happened." "Why would I expect transparency?" he said, voice tightening, "when this entire marriage started as a transaction?" The words landed like a slap. She took a step back. "Is that all I am to you? A transaction?" He hesitated, and that hesitation was louder than anything he could have said. Anne turned away. "I can't do this." That night, Kenta Daisuke raised a glass of sake over dinner. To the power of exposure. Marcus sat across from him, lips pressed in guilt. "She'll never forgive me." "You were never there to be forgiven," Kenta said, swirling his drink, "only to ignite the match." Haruki entered the suite late that night, tired and hollow. He turned on the television, poured a glass of water, then froze. A news anchor read from a screen. New documents reveal that Haruki Daisuke's marriage to American humanitarian Mari Clarke was arranged by contract. The leak, allegedly from internal legal documents, cast further doubt on the legitimacy of their union. The room spun. His father had finally done it. He opened his mouth, then shut it. There was a sound behind him. Anne stood in the doorway holding her phone. Her face was unreadable. "You knew this could happen," she said quietly. "I didn't think he'd—" "But you didn't tell me." He stepped forward. "Anne?" She pulled a folder from behind her back and laid it on the coffee table. "Divorce papers." He stared at them, stunned. "I thought something real was starting," she said, voice breaking. "I thought maybe, through all this, God was doing something between us." Haruki didn't speak. She gathered her purse and turned. "I hope he still is, but I won't stay chained to something that doesn't see me. You're not the only one with wounds, Haruki. I just refuse to let mine define me." She walked out without slamming the door, and for the first time, Haruki didn't chase. He just sat, and the silence pressed down on him like the ghost of his mother, disappointed, watching. The plane touched down in Atlanta, under gray skies, no security, no headlines, no husband. Mari Clarke stepped out of the terminal with nothing but a suitcase and a whisper. "Lord, if I walked into the fire, don't let me walk out empty." Her old neighborhood welcomed her like a grandmother, a little run down, a little loud, but deeply familiar. She rented a 2-bedroom bungalow with peeling paint and a crooked porch light. And the very next Sunday, she opened her door. 8 people came. One brought cookies, another brought tears. They sat in folding chairs with cracked Bibles and open hearts. Anne led them with a guitar she hadn't touched in months. No stage, no microphones, no performance, just worship. "Great is thy faithfulness." She sang with a voice that trembled, not because she was unsure, but because she finally wasn't pretending. Meanwhile, Tokyo was burning, metaphorically. The leaked contract had spread like wildfire. News outlets speculated. Shareholders panicked. The board called emergency meetings. Haruki Daisuke worked 16-hour days trying to spin the damage. His assistants came and went with trembling hands. His phone rang constantly. He never answered. He hadn't slept in 3 nights. He hadn't eaten in 2. He hadn't prayed since she left. On the morning of the company's biggest global summit, he stood backstage in a navy suit, pale and hollow. A makeup artist dabbed his forehead. A handler checked the speech one last time. "You good, sir?" someone asked. Haruki nodded, but he wasn't. The lights came up. The stage glowed. Haruki stepped into the spotlight. He began his keynote with robotic precision. "Thank you for joining the 7th Annual Global Tech Forum. At Daisuke Innovations, we believe..." Then the room tilted. He blinked. Hands trembled. Vision blurred. The words on the teleprompter melted into nonsense. People in the front row frowned. His heart thudded in his ears like a war drum. "We believe," he repeated, voice cracking. And then he dropped the clicker, stumbled, gasped, hands on his knees, eyes wide. A strangled sound left his throat, something between a sob and a plea. Security rushed in. So did cameras. Too late. The video went viral within hours. Billionaire CEO suffers panic attack on stage. Haruki Daisuke's breakdown, burnout or guilt. The clip looped across news feeds in every corner of the world. In Atlanta, Anne watched it from her phone as she cleaned up paper cups and hymn sheets. She stared at the screen for a long time. Then she did something she hadn't done in days. She wept for him. But she didn't pray for reconciliation. She prayed for redemption. The Daisuke estate was nearly silent. The staff walked softer now, unsure of what lingered in the air since the collapse. Haruki sat alone in the room that once belonged to his mother. The panic attack had left a ringing in his ears, but it wasn't the noise that haunted him. It was the silence, the kind his mother had endured. He stood and crossed to the closet. Something inside him pulled toward it. A memory, maybe. Or maybe just desperation. He pushed aside the rows of carefully preserved kimonos and coats. Tapped on the back wall. A hollow echo. A false panel. He slid it open with trembling hands. Inside was a wrapped package. Dusty. Old. Tied with red string. He brought it to the bed and unwrapped it slowly. Inside, a faded journal with his mother's name in delicate script, Aya Daisuke. He opened it to the first page and read, March 3rd. Today, I prayed with the woman from the market. She says there are churches still meeting quietly, without fear. I want to believe we can worship without hiding. April 9th. Haruki asked me about the hymn I was humming. I told him it was a prayer in disguise. He said he liked it, that it felt like sunlight. May 12th. Kenta said, if I speak of Jesus again, he'll send me away, that I'll ruin Haruki's future with my foreign fantasy. He tore the cross from my neck. June 1st. I will not renounce him. The last entry was barely readable, ink smudged by what looked like tears. Haruki stared at the pages until they blurred. He clutched the journal to his chest and slid to the floor, shaking, not because of what was written, but because he had known. He had felt it his whole life, and still, he had let her be erased to keep the machine running. No more. 2 days later, Haruki stood before the board. His suit was immaculate. His eyes were steel. I am resigning as CEO of Daisuke Innovations. The room erupted in protest. You can't. You'll destroy the company. What about your grandfather's legacy? Haruki raised a hand, calm, final. My grandfather built this empire. My father corrupted it, and I helped. Not anymore. He walked out before they could respond. He sold his shares within a week, donated half to global education initiatives, disappeared without a press release. No farewell speech, no exit interview. He left the name Daisuke behind like a burnt offering. In Atlanta, Anne sat on her porch with a hymnal in her lap when her phone buzzed. A headline: Haruki Daisuke resigns, liquidates holdings, vanishes. She clicked the article. Read the quote at the end. Confirmed by his spokesperson, "There is no point in building a kingdom if it costs your soul." Anne didn't smile. She didn't whisper, "I told you so." She bowed her head and wept. Not because he had lost everything, but because, for the first time, he had finally let go. The living room was full, not of noise, but people. People who had once been strangers now lingered like family. Worship sheets were scattered across the floor. A guitar hummed softly in the background. Anne stood in the center, trying to smile. Her skin was pale, her voice thinner than usual. "I want to thank y'all," she said. "You didn't just come for songs or sermons. You showed up for each other." She took one shaky step backward. Her vision doubled, then tripled. A hand reached out to steady her. Too late. Her knees buckled. She collapsed mid-blessing. Someone screamed. A chair clattered. Arms caught her. "Call 911. The guitar stopped. Everything else kept spinning. The hospital room buzzed with the soft rhythm of machines. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead. "She's dehydrated," the nurse told Tasha. "Exhaustion, low blood pressure. She's been burning the candle at both ends." Tasha wiped her eyes. "She won't stop. Not even when she needs to." She looked down at Anne, who lay pale and unconscious. "She gives even when she's empty." Haruki stood outside the hospital, staring up at the entrance like it might spit him back out. He hadn't been to a hospital since his mother died. He stepped inside slowly, heart thudding in his throat. A volunteer pointed him to the chapel. He walked in, closed the door behind him. The room was empty, except for the cross on the wall. He sat in the back pew, and for the first time in his adult life, he spoke real talk, not to a board, not to a crowd, not to himself, but to God. "I don't know how to do this." He swallowed hard. "But I think she's the only reason I even dared to try. I've seen her walk through fire for people who wouldn't lift a finger for her. I've watched her lose everything because she refused to lie." His voice cracked. "I don't want her to be a martyr. I just want her to be okay." He looked up, his eyes wet, his hands trembling. "God, if you're real, if you see her the way she sees you, please, don't take her now." A silence fell over the chapel, heavy, sacred, and then a montage played in Haruki's mind like a memory only heaven could project. Anne on stage testifying in Tokyo, Anne refusing Kenta's hush money, Anne singing alone in the sunroom, Anne handing him a cassette, Anne laying divorce papers on the table and walking away, not in rage but in dignity, Anne praying for him when he was too proud to ask. Every moment she had stood for truth, when no one else would, and now he stood for her. In the silence, he whispered again, "Not because I deserve her, but because I finally believe in the God she never stopped serving." It was a normal Sunday afternoon. The chairs were out. The folding table was set with styrofoam cups and homemade banana bread. The Bluetooth speaker stuttered into the opening chords of "Draw Me Close." Anne stood at the front, guitar in hand, still pale but recovering. A knitted shawl wrapped around her shoulders like a mantle. The worship circle had grown. 20 people now. Word had spread about the ex-pastor who hosted church without judgment, hype, or manipulation. Anne strummed a chord. Her voice, though faint, still carried. "You're all I want. You're all I've ever needed." The front door creaked open. She glanced up, mid-strum, and her breath caught. He was there, Haruki Daisuke. No suit, No entourage, no spotlight, just jeans, a worn hoodie, and a man who had been broken and built again. Heads turned. A few whispered. Tasha nearly dropped her cup, but Anne didn't move. She kept playing, kept singing, because if she stopped, the moment would become about him. And this wasn't his. It was God's. Haruki stepped inside quietly and stood in the back. He didn't wave, didn't speak. When the song ended and the prayer circle formed, he sat, cross-legged, head bowed. He said nothing until everyone else had gone, until it was just him and Anne, folding chairs, and the scent of banana bread lingering in the air. She wiped down a table with slow, deliberate hands, not rushing, not breaking the silence. Finally, he spoke. "I didn't come back for you." She didn't look up. "I came back for him." Anne finished her wipe, folded the cloth, set it aside, still silent, still processing. But when she passed him on her way to the kitchen, she didn't ask him to leave. She didn't ask what had changed. She just gently placed a folded worship lyric sheet in front of him, and he picked it up with reverence. Haruki sat on that folding chair like it was a throne of grace, and for the first time, he worshipped, not to impress, not to perform, just to be near the God that Anne had once whispered about through tears, the God who had finally whispered back 1 year later. The auditorium wasn't grand, not by Tokyo standards. No LED walls, no fog machines, no orchestras. But it was full. Men in tailored suits sat beside women in Sunday dresses. Business leaders shared pews with single mothers. Crosses met code. Innovation met intercession. The banner overhead read, "Faith and Innovation Summit, a gathering for the soul and the system." Mari Clarke stood behind the podium in a simple ivory dress, curls free, eyes steady. "We don't change the world with branding," she said. "We change it by becoming the truth we preach." The crowd leaned in. "My faith doesn't compete with excellence, it anchors it. And when I was at my lowest, God didn't send me a miracle. He sent me a moment, a single, honest moment, where I said, 'Yes, Lord,' even here, even now." She stepped back as the applause swelled. Then Haruki took the stage. He wore no tie, no designer cufflinks, just a gray linen suit and a small wooden cross around his neck, his mother's. He paused at the mic. "I used to believe control was power, that if I could own enough, outthink enough, outperform enough, I could avoid the things that hurt me." A hush fell. But love doesn't exist in control. It exists in surrender. And I learned that from a woman who refused to perform holiness, who simply lived it. He turned slightly to face Anne, seated to the side of the stage. "She didn't save me, but she introduced me to the God who could." Soft gasps rippled through the crowd as he stepped away from the podium and walked to her. He knelt, not with a ring, but with open hands. "I don't want to build empires. I want to build altars." His voice dropped to a whisper that still carried. "I vow to walk with you, in truth, in silence, in service, and if God allows, in love." Anne blinked back tears. She didn't speak. She stood, took his hands, and as the simple chords of "Come Thou Fount of Every Blessing" began to play over the speaker system, they stood together. No kiss, no spotlight chase, just the unshakable peace of two people who had died to pride and lived to grace. The camera panned wide, but heaven zoomed in and smiled. It wasn't in a church. It was under a sycamore tree in the backyard of the little house in Atlanta, the same one where Anne had started her worship circle. Folding chairs lined the grass. No decorations, no aisle, just presence. A few familiar faces gathered, Tasha wiping away tears, one of Haruki's former assistants kneeling beside a soundboard, and 2 children passing out homemade fans. There were no flower petals, no organ, just Anne in a simple cream dress with bare feet, and Haruki in a linen shirt with sleeves rolled, the wooden cross of his mother tucked beneath the buttons. They stood hand in hand before a local pastor who had wept through half the worship circle the night before. The pastor opened his Bible. "Marriage," he said, "is not a performance. It's not power. It's not a rescue mission." He looked at them both. "It's a reflection of Christ and his bride, of covenant, of undeserved, unshakable grace." Anne smiled. Haruki squeezed her hand. Then they spoke the words they had written together. Anne, with tears, said, "I don't vow to be perfect. I vow to be real, to love you when I'm full of faith and when I'm crying through it, and to never let your wounds scare me away." Haruki, with nothing but love in his eyes, said, "I vow to walk in truth, to keep nothing hidden, not my fears, not my past, not my weakness, and to love you not as a fixer, but as a fellow servant of grace." There was no ring exchange, only hands clasped, and when the pastor said, "You may now seal your covenant," they didn't kiss. They knelt together, and from the folding chairs behind them, the circle began to sing, "Come, thou fount of every blessing." Tears streamed freely. Even Haruki didn't hide his, because this time, it wasn't about saving face, saving legacy, or saving each other. It was about honoring the God who had saved them. Carl, the end.